The shell hit like a hammer on steel, and the ship did not blink. On the 20th of May 1951, off Wonsan, USS New Jersey flagship of the U.S. 7th Fleet, under Vice Admiral Harold M. Martin took a North Korean shore battery round on Turret 1. 1 sailor fell, 2 were wounded. The rest of the crew tightened their gear and went to work. Directors tracked, plotters marked, powder bags rose in the hoists. The battleship answered with her 5-inch divided by 38 seconds and the 9 16-inch divided by 50 Mark 7 rifles that made cities tremble in World War II. In minutes, the enemy cave gun that had scored the hit simply stopped existing. Deck logs show the rhythm with zero drama. Arrival off Korea. May 17. First Korean War strikes May 20. Hit taken. Space secured. Counter battery fired. Mission continued. More targets struck near Yangyang and Kansong on May 23-27 and May 30. This is how Americans fight. Grieve without pausing, then do the next right thing perfectly. A UN prisoner in the hills later told his bunkmate, "That thunder is someone coming for us." And he was right. Steel obeys math, and American math under pressure is ruthless. Shore gunners had bet on luck and fear. They met training and nerve. What looks like myth is procedure. Magazine crews moving 1-ton projectiles with parbuckles and chain falls. Powdermen passing silk bags like a heartbeat. Turret captains reporting readiness while the blast slaps the hull like a drum. Electricians kept the bus steady. Fire controlmen walked the salvo in, click by click, until the cave mouth folded. Boatswains' mates kept the ammunition train safe. So no accident could do what the enemy could not. The hit became a footnote, not a turning point. The ship became a promise that kept coming back. In the days that followed, New Jersey ranged up and down the coast, dropping bridges, ripping rails, and burning ammunition dumps that fed enemy divisions. She had arrived off Korea on May 17 and was fully engaged by May 20, proof that ready is not a speech. It's a schedule. The lesson spread through camps and coastlines alike. If a fast battleship shows up, the map will change, and the guns that jeered at dawn will be silent by dark. A fire controlman laid a pencil across the plotting board and tapped the range line. Once she's out of the tube, nobody can call it back. He meant a 16-inch shell, nearly a ton of steel and explosive, leaving a 50 caliber barrel at a speed that turns miles into minutes. No radio jamming can bend it, no spoofing screen can deceive it. In June and July 1951, USS New Jersey returned to Wonsan to carve at rail lines, dams, bridges, and gun pits. The enemy tried to copy their lucky moment. On July 28, they managed only near misses. Counter-battery erased them, again. Physics and people made that certainty possible. 3 turrets, 9 rifles, each served by crews who treated danger like a checklist item, not a panic cue. The Mark 8 analog computer, stable verticals, and drilled spotters converted heavy seas and bad weather into solvable math. Corrections walked salvos in clean steps until the target disappeared. That summer, the ship knocked out a dam, dropped a bridge, caved in gun positions, and blew 2 ammunition dumps into white glare that rolled across the hills like daylight. The work looked like industry. The deck lurched and the big rifles recoiled, but the feeling was calm, American calm, made of training, trust, and a love for doing things right. A South Korean prisoner, a school teacher before the war, later wrote that the ground trembled in long, even waves like a train under the earth. He added a line you can wrap a nation around. We counted the seconds between flash and crash, then we counted on America. The enemy's shock was speed of learning. They swapped hide sites, tried deception, shifted batteries along the coves. New Jersey's observers found them, the directors solved them, and the next salvo finished them. You cannot jam a shell that is already falling. You cannot argue with a crater. When a spotter wrote that autumn, Every shot on target, most beautiful shooting I have seen in 5 years. He was doing more than praising gunnery. He was naming a culture that treats accuracy like honor. The next step in that honor is Speed, the fast fortress that arrives when it is needed and refuses to leave until the job is done. A destroyer officer of the deck watched a grey wall gain on his tin can and laughed into the wind. Battleships are not supposed to sprint, but USS New Jersey did 33 knots on 4 Westinghouse-geared turbines, driving 212,000 shaft horsepower through 4 screws. She measured 887 feet overall and 108 feet abeam, and still moved like she was late for a promise. She left Norfolk in April 1951, was off Korea by May 17, and firing by May 20. Endurance turned speed into strategy. 14,890 nautical miles at 15 knots meant she could cross oceans and still arrive, mean, accurate, and fully supplied. That mobility became mercy. It put heavy guns on a coastline where the enemy thought distance was a shield. It let the flagship appear, strike, shift, and appear again before new orders could even be typed. In a hillside stockade, a British prisoner whispered to a friend, "If that big one is on our side, we might see home." He was not admiring lines. He was reading logistics. Speed carries hope, and hope is a weapon. But engines only matter when people make them sing. Firemen held steam and feed water steady. Electricians kept power clean. Quartermasters kept station with carriers and cruisers in weather that would unnerve a pier. Boatswains' mates kept the ammunition train safe and smooth. While the blast pounded the deck like a drum, the ship acted like a single careful machine, because in the American Navy, training is a promise you keep when the pressure rises. The enemy expected a plodding dreadnought and planned to outrun it ashore. Instead, they met a fast battleship with carrier legs, cruiser stride, and dreadnought punch. Move a battery to a new cove, and New Jersey shifted before the smoke cleared. Hide behind a ridge, and spotters walked rounds over the crest until the hide vanished. Try again on July 28, and watch near misses turn into silence. Hit her in May, and see that nothing moves her but orders. The question that follows Speed is even bigger. How did a ship that slept in reserve return this fast and this sharp? The answer waits where America keeps its memory shipyards and chiefs. Paint peeled. Tarps came off. The big muzzles stared across the slips at Bayonne while the yard smelled like solvent, oil, and second chances. USS New Jersey had been decommissioned on the 30th of June 1948. When war returned, America reached into the reserve and pulled out a sledgehammer. She was recommissioned on the 21st of November 1950. Many of her sailors were recalled reservists. They shook down in the Caribbean, burned off rust, and taught new hands the old dance until each drill felt like muscle memory. On the 16th of April 1951, the ship steamed for the Pacific. By May 17 she was off Korea. By May 20 she was firing. This speed from mothballs to bombardment was not luck. It was a process a free nation had earned. Philadelphia Navy Yard once enlarged its shipways to build her and installed turbines before launch. That kind of institutional memory does not vanish when peacetime comes. Manuals were correct because engineers wrote them for builders and sailors, not for shelves. Chiefs carried drawings in their heads and grease under their nails. Young sailors memorized checklists under men who had learned them in the last war. The result is a timeline that looks impossible today. Decommissioned in 1948, recommissioned in 1950, off Korea, and shooting in May 1951. By May 23, 27, and May 30, the ship struck near Yangyang and Kansong, dropping bridges and ripping rail lines that fed the front. In June and July, she returned to Wonsan, traded with shore batteries, and silenced them again on July 28, when their best salvo managed only near misses. The rhythm of the gun line felt like a factory clock. Ammunition moved in arcs from magazine to hoist to breech. Safety checks were not theatre. They were survival. Because safety was real, Rate of fire stayed high, and accidents stayed rare. A South African prisoner heard the cadence of the heavy guns and later wrote, "News reached us. The Admiral's flagship was back. Presence can break chains." The enemy had expected a ceremonial hulk for politics. They got steel that changed maps. The next step is the part that makes jaws drop. Precision, so clean a spotter would soon write, every shot on target. A cold wind ran down the east coast of Korea, and the ship breathed smoke. October 1951. The rifles went to work with a patience that felt like kindness. Bridges shattered into the surf. Gun pits turned to dust. Ammunition dumps flashed white and rolled into a black boil. The sound was not wild, it was measured. Gunnery teams plotted drift, powder temperature, barrel wear, and target angle. Corrections flowed to the directors. The next salvo landed closer than the last, until the spotter finally wrote the line every sailor remembers. "Every shot on target, most beautiful shooting I have seen in 5 years. Numbers strip the romance and leave the awe. 9 16-inch rifles, shells weighing 2,700 pounds, ranges past 20 miles. Flight time tallied, wind drift solved, and fall of shot corrected until nothing useful remained on that grid." A Greek prisoner in a coastal camp said the prisoners learned to count the seconds from flash to crash and then to breathe again. "They never miss twice," he wrote. "That is what American precision feels like from the ground." Mercy delivered by math. The enemy tried to answer on July 28 with more surefire. They achieved near misses. New Jersey's reply silenced them. Again, the human gear clicked on without bravado. Rammermen shoved brass and silk into steel throats. Safety officers watched each step like their lives depended on it, because they did. The lesson is humble and hard. Accuracy ends wars faster than noise does. And accuracy is a choice trained into thousands of hands, not a miracle granted to a few. The next chapter takes you beneath the teak and paint to the reason a lucky hit could not break this ship armor like a bank vault wrapped around life. A machinist's mate ran a rag across a gunhouse plate and felt the thickness in his wrist bones. Protection on USS New Jersey was layered and logical, a fortress wrapped around life. Along the vitals ran a belt about 13.5 inches thick. Internal bulkheads, boxed machinery, and magazines. The armor deck sat under a bomb deck of special treatment steel, designed to shatter and slow plunging fire. The barbettes and gun houses were massive, up to 17.3 inches of Class A armor, where it mattered, a bank vault around powder, steel, and men. This is why a hit on the 20th of May 1951 killed a sailor, wounded 2, and changed nothing else. The gunhouse held. The handling rooms stayed dry. The turret captain reported readiness, and the ship answered with full batteries that erased the enemy position that had fired the shot. A Turkish prisoner later said it with simple dignity. "We prayed for the men inside that steel, then we heard them answer." The enemy had counted on the lucky hit. They learned that luck cannot penetrate design, and design backed by training becomes destiny. This is the American difference in hard numbers. Armor measured in inches, not millimeters. Speed measured in tens of knots, not in wishful charts. Power measured at 212,000 shaft horsepower, not in speeches, and all of it bound by procedures that make hard days look ordinary. The steel matters, the people matter more. Electricians held the bus steady so no surge would make tragedy. Damage control parties sealed, shored, and breathed through masks, as if that were just another Tuesday. Boatswains' mates kept ammunition moving without a single missed signal. The ship absorbed the blow, kept her word, and finished the mission. That is not arrogance. That is a culture that refuses to fail. The payoff to come will top even this. Allies on deck, shore batteries annihilated again, and a marathon weekend of bombardment 16 hours over 2 days that wrote the armistice horizon in American fire. The band struck up, and the rails were manned, and for a moment the teak deck felt like a parade ground at sea. It was May 1953 when President Syngman Rhee and the First Lady came aboard USS New Jersey, and sailors in dress blues stood shoulder to shoulder while the flagship swung at anchor off the Korean coast. It looked ceremonial, but everyone knew the truth. Visits like this happened on ships that changed battlefields. Days later, shore guns tried again. The ship answered with 5-inch and 16-inch fire that tore the hostile positions out by the roots. A South Korean sailor who served as interpreter that day later said, "The deck smelled like pipe tobacco and diesel and relief." He remembered the First Lady's gloved hand on a lifeline and the sudden quiet when the order passed, "Commence firing." That is what Alliance sounds like music at noon, thunder by dusk. Below decks, the machinery stayed calm. Electricians held the load. Firemen watched steam like hawks. Powder handlers moved silk bags with the slow grace of people who knew what a spark could do. Above, the directors walked the fall of shot until the cave mouths stopped flashing. On the beach, enemy crews felt the air tear and knew the tempo had turned against them for good. They had waited for pomp, they got presents. They had counted on propaganda, they met performance. A prisoner of war in a coastal compound wrote later that the guards stopped talking when the big ship's silhouette cut the haze. "We did not cheer," he wrote. "We just stood taller. He was not the only one." Alliance is more than flags and photographs. It is steel that shows up, and men who keep it honest. It is a commander from a free country stepping aboard a free country's ship and knowing what that means at gun range. The lesson felt simple, even as it stunned the coast. Ceremony on this deck never stood alone. The moment that binds the chapter isn't the salute or the band. It is the working day that followed, when the flagship's batteries reminded the enemy that diplomacy backed by American firepower is not a posture. It is a plan. Word spread from camp to village to line. The battleship that would not scare was back, and the batteries that had jeered at morning colours would be dust before sunset. What begins with a welcome aboard ends with a demand met in steel, and the map inches toward freedom one shattered emplacement at a time. The loaders talked in short words because breath mattered and timing mattered more. The 11th of July 1953. The first Saturday, the ship began a bombardment that ran for 9 hours. July 12, Sunday, she did 7 more, 16 hours in 48, the kind of sustained fire that makes the clock feel like a cheap invention. On the projectile flats, men rolled 16-inch shells along skids, set fuses, checked tracers, and listened for the hoist clatter that meant the next lift. In the powder flats, silk bags passed hand to hand in a rhythm older than most of the crew, a heartbeat measured in grains and seconds. The steel shook, and the smoke clung sweet and sharp to the throat. Above, the directors and rangefinders corrected tiny errors and made huge differences. The shore positions had concrete, camouflage, and habit. Habit was their worst defense. They had never seen a weekend like this. Every time the flashes died, the next salvo started somewhere else, then rolled back to the first targets before new crews found their phones. You could not jam a ballistic arc. You could not talk a crater out of existing. The only answer was to move, and there was no time to move. A UN prisoner in a hillside camp counted the seconds on his fingers the way he counted prayers. Saturday became a drum, he wrote later. Sunday became a door. He meant the door home. He meant the way sound can teach hope when nothing else can. On the beach, enemy crews understood, maybe for the first time, that they were working against a country that could push this much ordnance, this precisely, for this long, and call it a weekend. The human engine that made it happen did not need speeches. Rammer men drove brass and silk into breaches that closed like bank vaults. Safety observers watched for sparks like hunters. Engineers held 600-pound steam, steady and clean, so the ship never starved for power. The American way showed up in a simple rhythm. Do your part, trust your shipmate, repeat until the target is gone. By the time the last Sunday salvo fell, Rumor outran smoke. Camps whispered it. Villages did too. The flagship had not sprinted and smashed and left. She had held a coastline in her hands for 2 days and squeezed until the enemy let go. The chapter ends where the next begins, with a question no foe could answer. How do you beat a system that never misses twice? A radio man flipped message blanks while a director officer called corrections that sounded like math class until the horizon exploded. Here is the question that haunted enemy observers and sometimes even surprised friends. How do thousands of moving parts act like one mind when seas are rough, targets hide, and time is short? The answer is not magic. It is American systems thinking. The battleship tied radar, optics, analog computers, stable verticals, radios, and trained people into a loop that turned chaos into aim. The Mark 8 brain and its stable companions digested range, bearing, wind, powder temperature, barrel wear, and drift. The directors sent orders. Turrets answered with steel. Observers spotted the fall of shot and fed corrections right back into the circuit. The second salvo landed closer. The third broke something important. A Filipino prisoner heard one series and thought they were firing a metronome. I could set a watch by them, he wrote. Then I saw the smoke on the hills. He did not see guesswork. He saw a country that made precision a habit and taught it to kids who had been hauling nets or stacking boxes 12 months earlier. This is where the enemy's shock hardens into respect. They were competent. They were brave. They were also up against an engine that blended human judgment with measured fire in a way no deception could unravel. Guns that big are not supposed to be merciful. But mercy is what precision sounds like when the shells find only what must be broken. A Greek prisoner who had been a mason wrote that he counted impacts on a bridge and realized the Americans were cutting joints more carefully than he did with a trowel. He was not romantic. He was correct. Systems fail when pride replaces discipline. Here, discipline replaced pride. Sailors called corrections without ego. Chiefs taught without drama. Officers listened. The loop stayed tight. The ship's motto, firepower for freedom, felt less like a boast than a diagram. On the beaches and in the caves, the lesson became simple. If you flashed, they found you. If they found you, they solved you. If they solved you, the next salvos would turn your cover into powder and your plan into smoke. The bridge forward is industrial, not tactical. Who else could build the fast fortress and keep this system fed for years? A riveter's grandson walked the Philadelphia Navy Yard ways and stared at a set of blocks so large the yard had to be rebuilt to hold them. That is how USS New Jersey came into the world. The shipways were enlarged to bear her weight. The turbines were installed before launch, a feat of planning and crane ballet. At launch, she weighed 36,446 tons, and that was just the beginning. This was not a one-off miracle. It was a nation's muscle memory. When the world caught fire again, that memory woke fast. Bayonne crews peeled tape off muzzles. Chiefs hauled out dog-eared checklists. Young sailors learned old dances. The recommissioning came on the 21st of November 1950. The Pacific called in April 1951. Korea saw her by May 17. She fired by May 20. Timelines that look impossible today were work weeks then. Why only America? Because no other nation could bring shipyard scale, foundry skill, and training pipelines together at the same speed, with the same fidelity. Belt armor measured in double-digit inches had to be forged, treated, and machined by plants that understood heat like a language. Gear teeth for the turbines had to be cut with tolerances so tight that steam itself seemed nervous. Hundreds of subcontractors, thousands of workers, and a culture that married draftsman care to crane driver bravado put a city into motion and then sent her to sea. On the other side of the world, the enemy looked at that silhouette and realized they were not facing a single ship. They were facing a civilization's supply chain turned into a weapon. You could bomb a yard, but you could not bomb the habits that made that yard honest. You could hide a gun, but you could not hide from a nation that had learned to produce accuracy like it produced corn. A French prisoner wrote years later that he kept a scrap of newspaper with the word recommissioned folded in his boot. To me it meant this. He wrote, "They can stop and start giants. That is the quiet truth of industrial democracy. It can pause, it can resume, and when it returns, it comes back sharper than before. The payoff to this truth is measured at sea. Speed under armor, endurance across oceans, and guns that speak with clarity at 20 miles. The next chapter turns those facts into the kind of numbers that bend belief. A loader palmed the copper driving band of a 16-inch projectile and grinned because the thing felt like a small car and still flew truer than most men can throw a stone. Here are the numbers that make veterans shake their heads. Main battery reach. Beyond 20 miles. Projectile weight. Up to 2,700 pounds for the armor-piercing round. Broadside weight. Tons, not metaphors. Belt armor. About 13.5 inches where it mattered. Gunhouse and barbette protection. Up to 17.3 inches of Class A armor. Propulsion. 4 Westinghouse geared turbines, 212,000 shaft horsepower. Speed. 33 knots in a ship longer than 2 football fields. Endurance. Roughly 14,890 nautical miles at 15 knots. These are not slogans. They are the way the ship did math with steel. A Canadian prisoner said he could feel the calculations in his ribs. You could hear the problem, he joked later. Then the answer. He meant the way the second salvo always came closer. He meant the way the third one ended the question. On the beach, enemy crews learned the same lesson and put it simpler. You can work around a patrol. You can survive a raid. But you cannot live under a sky that drops 1-ton solutions all afternoon. Statistics become human when the day is bad and the system still holds. Hit the turret face in May 1951 and watch the ship stay in action. Fire 9 hours on a Saturday and 7 on a Sunday in July 1953, and watch engineering keep steam and electrical power flat and faithful. Make a mistake on that chain, and men die. Make it perfect, and enemies give up the ground without knowing exactly when they decided to. This is where American character meets American hardware. Work hard. Get the math right. Care about the guy next to you. Put your flag on things that function. Do it again tomorrow. The ship's motto, Firepower for Freedom, reads flashy until you see what it protects. Then, it reads like a contract, and still there is one more crest to climb. Numbers matter, but outcomes matter more. The last chapter ties the ledger tight. Enemies silenced, allies honored, prisoners walking out, and a nation proving that overwhelming force can be patient and precise at the same time. The deck was quiet when President Rhee returned after the guns cooled to present the Presidential Unit Citation to the 7th Fleet in September 1953. The teak held footprints from generals and mess cooks and men who had loaded silk and steel into a machine that never lied to them. Here is the final problem to solve, and it is moral, not mechanical. Did all that power translate into good? New Jersey took a shore battery hit on the 20th of May, 1951, lost 1 sailor, and kept fighting. She went back to Wonsan in June and July, crushed return fire on July 28, and spent July 11-12, 1,953 pounding fortified positions for 16 hours over 2 days. Her last engagement near Wonsan came on July 26. The armistice line a sunrise away. Enemies stopped firing. Prisoners started counting gates. A British prisoner described his release as like breathing for the first time. A South Korean teacher found his wife in a crowd and held up a ration tin like a trophy. He said, "The big ship never missed twice." People in caves and on docks knew the ship by silhouette, and they knew what her presence meant. The line would hold, the maps would change, and the shooting would end sooner because the salvos were so sure. Even enemy crews began to nod at the name. They had tried courage and camouflage. The ship answered with care and endurance, and that combination is the hardest thing to break in war. The American difference showed in the way the crew treated each other, the Allies, and even the sea. Discipline without cruelty, power without boasting, a culture that grieves its dead and goes right back to work for the living. That is the unglamorous miracle that turns impossible statistics into humane outcomes. So yes, the answer is good, and it is measurable. 1 hit, no mission kill. 16 hours of bombardment without the engineering plant blinking. Bridges down, ammunition dumps gone, rail lines twisted, and friends walking out of camps. No other nation on Earth, in that place and time, could have put that much speed under that much armor, trained that many people to that level of precision, and kept it moving like a single careful mind. The last sound is not the guns. It is quiet. The kind that follows a job done right, with the motto resting like a hand on a shoulder. Firepower for freedom then, now, always.